Today, I wanted to share a little bit about one of my favorite collections, the Pullman Porter Company records that are primarily housed in Chicago. So I could definitely go into detail about my experience with these records and what I think people can likely get from these records in terms of helping their research. So I first became familiar with the records after looking at some relatives listed in the US federal census. And looking in that occupation column, I found some relatives who worked for what was listed as the Pullman Company. And I was slightly familiar, having grown up in Chicago and heard of the Pullman neighborhood and that the Pullman Company was primarily housed there. And I was curious if I could find out more about their experience working for the Pullman Company. In particular, I had a second great grandfather who worked for the company for a brief period. And after doing some digging, I found that the Newberry Library in Chicago, a public, actually it's a private research library that houses tons of textual records. They have almost all of the Pullman Company's records. So employee records, records of service on the cars, historical information from when the Pullman Company started all the way up until really the 1970s and a little bit later. And so where I think there's a lot of opportunity and where I got a lot of good information is from those employee records. So like I mentioned, if someone has a relative whose occupation is listed on a World War II draft card or the census or another record as maybe a Pullman porter or a railroad maintenance worker, or maybe they worked in the house there, they can look and inquire with the Newberry Library in Chicago, or they could take a visit and see these original records firsthand. These are really valuable. Some of them list, they list birthplace, of course, what they did for the Pullman Company when they started. Some of the records, like the employee card, some of them have photos of the workers. I've been able to find a good friend of mine, her grandfather was a porter, and there was a photo that she had never seen. She actually had never seen a picture of him at all. There were personal letters. He wrote a letter asking for time off to go see his sick mother in Texas. And that original letter in his writing was there. It's just an incredible source of information. Also one that I've heard mentioned on Black Progen on YouTube. And I think that people can really take some of their research to the next level, looking at these sort of employment type of records. Really good question, because one of the records that I just mentioned was someone who worked in Chicago in their maintenance shop. But Pullman porters and those maintenance shops were housed all throughout the country, wherever there was a presence of the Pullman Company. So you'll find them in states like Tennessee, Missouri, Illinois, Pennsylvania, all throughout these different networks where the railroad operated. And so a good place to start, say you haven't found a relative who worked for the Pullman Company, but a good place to start would be just to look into the history of the railroad networks and as they built throughout this country, and also the history of the Pullman Company and their presence and how they grew and had allowed a lot of African Americans to be mobile through employment throughout this country, as well as traverse this country with the help of the Pullman Company. Pullman porter would have worked primarily on the rail cars, the sleeping cars. They may have helped passengers onto the car. They may have helped with luggage, and they would have provided service throughout the route of the trip. So if a passenger may have needed something, they were kind of the servicemen who provided, be it food and beverage, any sort of assistance as needed on and off the car. They were there to assist with that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Checking tickets, that sort of thing. Also, the Pullman Porter Company has records for those who were not just porters, but people who worked on the actual rail cars as well. Absolutely. So if you want to reach out, if you want more information about the Pullman Porter records, I recommend reaching out directly to the Newberry Library. I found a researcher there. Her name is Joellen Dickey. Her email is Dickey, DICKIEJ @newberry.org. And I've been able to get records scanned and emailed directly to me from her. If you have any questions around research, questions for me, you can reach out to me at hi, that's H-I, at kinkofa.com. That's Kinkofa. And Kinkofa is a genealogy community platform where we provide resources, both educational and communal, to help us in researching African-American family history. So there'll be much more to come after our launch in August 2021, but we are primarily a community of researchers really taking research into our own hands in the form of projects, resources, and community.